I'm Gaius Aurelius, Glo Valerius Maximus, though everyone calls me Glo. I'm 32 years old, living in the year 80 AD, the second year of the reign of Emperor Titus. As a full Roman citizen, I run a small bakery and olive oil workshop at the foot of the Esquiline Hill. In Rome, our week has 8 days. Let's start with day 1. Day 1. At the first hour of dawn, the insulated tenements of the Esquiline are still shrouded in a damp chill. I wrap myself in my coarse woolen toga and step out into the dark, slippery alleyways. The air out here is vile, a choking mix of charcoal smoke, spilled chamber pots, stagnant water, and the warm aroma of baking barley bread. The streets are steep and narrow, flanked by mud brick tenements rising 5 or 6 stories high, squeezing the sky into a thin sliver. Tattered tunics hang from clotheslines overhead, and stray dogs root through piles of garbage at the street corners. To survive in this place, you must understand a harsh truth. In Rome, no one is coming to save you. There is no police force to keep order, and if you have a civil dispute, you're on your own. If you're a nobody without connections, a gang could seize your bakery, and you wouldn't even get past the courthouse door. That is why, every morning at dawn, I make my way to the foot of the Palatine Hill for the salutatio, the morning greeting. In short, we plebeians line up at the mansion of a wealthy noble to pay our respects and, in return, receive a daily handout. The patron who looks after me is Lord Marcus. As you climb from the squalor of the slums up to the Palatine, the world changes instantly. Muddy brick paths give way to smooth, polished white marble. Manicured cypress trees line the road, and you can hear the faint, soothing splash of water from elegant courtyards. Standing in the grand atrium of his mansion, a space filled with the scent of pine oil and perfume, with a pool open to the sky, I wait in the morning chill along with dozens of other clients. With a heavy creak, the carved oak doors of the inner chambers swing open and Lord Marcus steps out, flanked by his household slaves. He wears a spotless toga of marble white wool with a broad purple border, radiating the subtle scent of expensive myrrh. Beside him stands his nomenclator, a specialized slave who whispers in the Lord's ear, quietly prompting him with the name and trade of every client as we approach. When my turn comes, Lord Marcus greets me with a warm but commanding smile, calling me by name. "Ah, Glo, my loyal baker. The olive oil bread you sent last week was excellent." Then, he takes a few bright yellow sesterces coins from a silver tray held by a slave and drops them into my palm. I run a successful workshop and don't need these few coins to survive. The handout is barely enough to buy a loaf of coarse bread anyway, but taking the money is a ritual. It's how I show my loyalty and keep my patron-client bond alive. In return for his protection and these coins, I must pay a price. We no longer vote for consuls in this era, but whenever Lord Marcus gives a speech at the court or attends a Senate meeting, I must show up as part of his sectators, his entourage to cheer for him, swell the crowd, and act as a human wall to boost his status. This bond between patron and client is the very fabric of Roman life. Lord Marcus provides me with legal protection and backs my business, and I, in turn, serve as the physical shield for his prestige. Once the greeting is over, I rush back to my bakery. Even though I hire 2 free laborers to help, I still need to oversee the ovens and the accounts myself. Day 2. I'm back in the workshop. 2 massive millstones of volcanic basalt groan as a donkey drags them in circles. Fine flour dust drifts through the sunlit window frames, coating our hair and faces in white. Next to the mills, the volcanic stone oven glows red hot, throwing off waves of heat smelling of fermenting yeast and burning pine, making it hard to breathe. I watch Stychus, one of my slaves, carrying heavy sacks of grain. Covered in white flour, he looks like a moving clay statue with beads of sweat carving muddy channels down his face. Many people think slavery is just endless whipping, but in truth, our laws have devised a highly sophisticated way of managing human labor. I allow Stychus to keep a peculium, a private fund. Legally, the money belongs to me, but in practice, I let him manage it. It is his personal savings account to buy back his freedom. Under Roman law, a slave is not a person. They are merely an instrumentum vocal, a speaking tool, no different from an ox or a shovel. Yet, the law allows the master to retain nominal ownership of the peculium while letting the slave use it. Why? Because it works far better than the whip. If a slave has no hope of ever being free, he will slack off, break the millstones, or run away, which only hurts my bottom line. But if I give him the prospect of buying his freedom, he will work himself to the bone and even create new bread recipes to increase profits. The peculium is a clever way of leveraging human hope. When Stychus finally saves enough to buy his freedom, I can use that money to buy 2 younger slaves. And he will become my libertus, a freedman who is legally free but still bound to me by moral and business obligations. In the afternoon, my oil merchant arrives. We stand on the stone steps outside the shop under the gaze of passers-by to perform the stipulatio, our traditional verbal contract. It's a highly ritualized oral agreement where the exact wording is everything. Do you promise to deliver 50 jars of Campanian olive oil on schedule? I promise. We then press our seals into a damp wax tablet that smells of pine, resin, and sweat. Our legal system doesn't rely on complex written contracts. Instead, it hinges on these solemn verbal promises and the annual edict of the praetor, which acts as a yearly guide for resolving civil disputes. In a world without central banks or credit bureaus, it is this ironclad legal accountability and personal reputation that keeps trade flowing across the Mediterranean. Day 3. Leaving the workshop in the hands of my freedmen and slaves, I head down to the Roman Forum to order a shipment of Spanish garum for the bakery and see what's happening in town. Under the blazing sun, the gleaming white marble temples and massive basilicas reflect the blinding light. The Forum is teeming with people's senators in purple-bordered togas, Syrian merchants in heavy hoods, and street vendors carrying baskets of chickpeas. The air is thick with burning incense and the dust kicked up by passing wagons. In the center of the hall, the praetor, the magistrate in charge of justice and legal interpretation, sits on his elevated marble tribunal. Today, he's hearing a property dispute over a water leak, but the lawyers are turning it into a theatrical performance. To win sympathy, the plaintiff's lawyer drags his client forward, tears open his tunic, and weeps over old battle scars to show what a noble patriot his client is. The defense lawyer fires back by reciting poetry written by the defendant to prove he is a gentle, peace-loving man. Amused, the praetor yawns and scribbles a formula on a wax tablet. He designates a local leather merchant as a private judge, handing the case over to him to find the facts. This two-phase system where the magistrate sets the legal framework and assigns a private citizen to judge the details is how we handle lawsuits in Rome. As for the verdict, I walked past the Forum later that afternoon and heard the poor leather merchant had gone to inspect the property. It turned out the roof wasn't leaking at all. The upstairs neighbor had simply had too much to drink and urinated on his balcony, letting it seep through. The case was dismissed, and the plaintiff was left with nothing but a wet ceiling. By midday, my stomach is growling, and a sharp, salty smell drifts from a street corner. I walk over to a food stall where the vendor is ladling a dark, thick sauce from an amphora as tall as a man. The jar took 2 months to travel here by ship from Spain. As he pours the sauce over my warm chickpeas, the vendor boasts, "This is the pure juice of prime anchovies, fermented in the sun for 3 months. The senators eat this every day." The sauce is thick and oily, coating the soft, warm chickpeas. I take a bite. First comes a burst of intense sea salt brine, followed by the deep, savory richness of fermentation, balanced by the nuttiness of the warm beans and a subtle, herbaceous bitterness at the finish. It's a flavor that hits you right in the chest. Beside me, a visiting Gaul takes his first bite and immediately gags at the smell of rotten fish, making the onlookers burst into laughter. But whether you're a senator or a beggar, we Romans cannot live without our garum. Day 4. By early afternoon, the day's baking is done. I leave the cleaning and sweeping to my hired helpers, grab my bronze strigil, and head to the Baths of Agrippa. The moment I step through the entrance, a wall of hot air and steam carrying the scent of sweat and olive oil hits me. Sunbeams stream through the round skylight in the massive concrete dome, cutting through the thick mist. The air is filled with the sound of splashing water, laughter, and vendors shouting to sell hot wine and sausages. I put on my thick wooden slippers and step onto the hot floor. The heat rises from the hypocaust system beneath the tiles, and if you don't wear slippers, the floor will blister your bare feet. I can hear the muffled grunts of the slaves below, gasping for air as they feed wood into the furnaces. There is no soap in Rome. Instead, I lie on a marble slab while a friendly shoemaker uses my bronze strigil to scrape off the layer of sweat, oil, and dust from my skin. Nearby, a group of senators lie back as 3 or 4 muscular slaves massage them with imported Spanish oils and gently scrape their skin with silver strigils. Even though we are all naked, the smoothness of a man's skin and the number of slaves he commands tell you exactly who is a patrician and who is a working man. Clean and scraped, I plunge into the frigidarium, the cold pool. Nearby, men are playing ball games, while a self-styled poet stands by a marble column, loudly reciting his latest epic to anyone who will listen. Entry to this grand palace costs only a single copper, as less than the price of a half loaf of coarse bread. The emperor pays for it all out of his own pocket, letting us commoners enjoy the same marble floors, magnificent vaults, and slave service as the senators. Floating in the cold water, you almost believe you are the master of the world. In this illusion of grandeur, all your worries and resentment melt away.